I'm here with Senator Ben Sasse. Senator Sasse, thanks for being with us.
Glad to be here. Sorry to be soaking wet.
I know that there's a lot going on in D.C. these days, so thanks for taking a few minutes.
Always frenzied, rarely productive.
We're going to talk about faith and politics for a few minutes, and I just wanted to start off by you describing a little bit about your religious background and how that actually kind of plays into your vocation now in politics.
Yeah, so I was blessed to grow up in a Missouri Synod Lutheran home and had the law and the gospel deeply ingrained into my childhood experience.
Mm-hmm.
And
a good Lutheran.
Yeah, it was a great upbringing. Wasn't all that well catechized though, and so I was really active in a lot of evangelical stuff via sports.
Mm-hmm.
So led the FCA chapter at my high school and went off to school in Boston, partly to wrestle, and in getting to college and realizing you weren't that well catechized, and then getting buffeted by a lot of the world, wrestled through a lot of theology in college, and then finally started reading, especially some Reformation stuff in college. I did my junior year abroad at Oxford, and sort of settled by conviction at the Reformed faith by the time I was graduating undergrad, and so I've been involved in Continental Reformed and Presbyterian churches most of my adult life, and so obviously have, from both the Lutheran side and the Presbyterian Reformed side, have a big doctrine of the two kingdoms. And so the work that God does as creator to maintain order in a East of Eden post-fall world is important stuff. It's not salvific, but it matters a lot. And I'm kind of an accidental politician, but it's one of many domains in which you can love your neighbor, except if you get to know the particular neighbors, then it gets harder to love. And I look like that picture of sin as well. So anyway, I've been in politics for 5.5 years. I campaigned for 1.5 years, been in office for 5.5 years. Still finding my sea legs in a very weird, kind of idolatrously tribal time.
That's a really good kind of background to it all. One of the things that's unique, and I've heard you say about you, is I hear you on the floor of the Senate and you actually invoke kind of theological categories. I've heard you talk about image of God. How do you think about that, given that we live in a pluralistic context, and a lot of your colleagues aren't necessarily Christians, certainly aren't all Christians. So how do you navigate that, and why do you feel kind of at ease to just kind of throw that theological language out there?
Yeah, well, I mean, for one thing, when you talk on the Senate floor, it's not like anybody actually hears you. There's never anyone there. We have this.
Well, I was listening.
Well, thank you for being one of the dozens watching C-SPAN. The Senate chamber often pretends it's a full venue, and really it's you talking to the presiding officer, usually the vice president, who's the president of the Senate, doesn't show up, so you're usually just talking to one person. But more seriously, the reality is we're all created in the image of God, and so that's just a truth, and it seems like it's useful to say true things because they're true, and then there often is more stuff that you need to unpack. When I was an academic for a while, I'm a historian by training, I remember writing a paper my first or second year in grad school, and this woman, Joanne Freeman is her name. She was a documentary filmmaker before she became an academic historian at Yale, and she was beating up my writing one time, and she said this really insightful thing that isn't directly on point to your question, but I think it sort of informs a little bit about how I try to speak in public, where you have lots of different audiences and communities potentially listening in on your conversation. And she said, this paragraph or this first page, this is crap. I mean, she was a little more charitable, but she said, think of A as assertion and B as qualification or clarification. She said, you've written this paper like an academic paper where you went B, B, A. You qualified, and then almost said something. She said, when we're making a documentary, we go ABA. You assert something, then you maybe have to qualify and nuance and shape and mold, but then reassert. Like, the point is to say something, not just to get all the qualifications out there, though there are things that are going to need to be qualified. And so it seems to me that given that everybody's created in the image of God, given that government is a kingdom of the left-hand gift that we have to maintain order in a world where the Tower of Babel deep in our souls could lead us to rip each other's throats out, figuratively or literally. Government is a blessing. It's not saving anybody's soul, but it's a blessing, and it seems like you should talk about first principles because they're true.
Yeah. So one more question, just really practically. When I work with young professionals, and because of that last point you made about ripping each other's throats out. I think a lot of them are just fed up with politics, and they're young Christian professionals, but many of them are more apt to go be at a protest than to go enter politics. What would your advice be to them?
Well, first of all, their disgust and frustration with what's happening in our public square isn't a bad thing. Like, I mean, the underlying reality is so troubled that being dissatisfied with things that are troubling seems to be like a true place to begin. But I think there's a long and special American tradition that I often call the Eisenhowerian one cheer for politics tradition, which is we need more middle brows in public life. We've got too many political addicts and we've got way too many people that are truly disengaged. And the right way to think about politics, I think, is that it's a framework for maintaining order so that all the really great stuff can happen. The founders sometimes talked about the silver frame and the golden apple. And the silver frame is a constitutional structure that maintains order and ordered liberty. But the golden apple at the middle could never be found in politics. It's the good, the true, and the beautiful. It's your neighborhood, it's your family, it's your church, it's your passions, it's your service. It's the breaking of bread together. All the most interesting things that happen in life are that golden apple at the center. And the silver frame is an important part of doing your maintenance work. It's kind of like going to the dentist. It isn't the greatest thing on earth to go to the dentist, but never going is a bad idea. And so being a little bit engaged in politics is helpful. But if you have to choose between being a political addict and saying I'm going to keep my distance, keeping your distance is better than being an addict, but the right answer is somewhere in the middle. And I think a huge part of what's wrong in our time is we start with a whole bunch of weirdos, the political addicts that define how the public square is supposed to work, and everybody else thinks you got to join them as tribalists or run away. And what I'd like is a lot more people to think, hey, maybe running for school board is an important way to love my neighbor. Maybe organizing things locally is a good toe in the water of public life, because it turns out that's actually probably the most important stuff, because it's where you actually know your neighbors and it's harder to disparage people you know, etc. And then more distant politics should flow from those more local experiences of known relational politics, I think.
Yeah, you might be able to get more done too on the local level as well.
Yeah. I mean, so much of national politics, especially on the domestic side right now, as opposed to national security strategy, there's a little more room for people to debate ideas and not immediately be cast into a Manichaean heaven and hell is coming by your view on foreign policy. Probably not. But people act like that on domestic politics a lot. And so much of it is just symbolic trolling, to own other people by rhetorical put-downs, not to actually get stuff done. And locally, a lot of people accomplish real things through public service.
I just love that I can sit down with a senator and he uses Manichaean. And don't worry, most of our folks will know what that means, so that's good.
I named one of my kids Augustine. We don't call him that because it's theologically heavy for a 9-year-old.
Yeah.
But
so
we call him Breck,
okay.
Because of course that sounds like a nickname that flows from Augustine. But thank you for being a Manichaean rhetorical nerd and all of you out there.